بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to our second session of our class, Contemporary Jurisprudence, Contemporary Laws of Islam, Contemporary Fiqh. In the first session, I spoke about the study of fiqh, jurisprudence, why we need it, why it's important, and what exactly the scholars discuss in this study. And then I went over the topic of contemporary jurisprudence and how does that how do we differentiate between that contemporary jurisprudence and the classical jurisprudence. And I mentioned that there are many laws, many new issues that have arise now during this age that did not apply to the times of the Imams. And thus, because of that, the ahadith, the Quran did not mention anything specific, anything explicit about those issues. And we said that this happens for two reasons, that we have issues now that never applied before. The first reason that I mentioned is because of the technological advancements, the scientific breakthroughs. Now we have issues, we have to deal with issues such as cloning, such as, for example, using telescope to determine, the beginning of the new month, organ donation, and so on and so forth. So that's one example that I gave, one reason why we need contemporary jurisprudence. And the second reason that I spoke about is because of the globalism that is happening and the migration of Muslims to all across the world. And because of this, we're also seeing new issues that never applied before. Issues such as fasting and praying in places that have extremely long nights or days, or they may even not have a day or night for a very long time. Or relying on the moon sighting of a distant country. Now, because we're all well connected because of the telecommunications, it's so easy to call a friend, someone that lives on the opposite side of the world, and ask him, was the moon sighted there or not? This was not viable, not possible during the times of the Imams. So now that we understand what exactly this study speaks about and what we study, the issues that we go over in contemporary jurisprudence, inshallah, I'd like to begin with the first mas'ala, the first issue, and I'll go over the different opinions. Like I mentioned before, I'll mention it again as a disclaimer that I'm not picking any certain sides. I'm not going to choose an opinion. I'm just going to present the different opinions and the specific arguments that the scholars have raised and they have presented in order to prove that what they have chosen is correct. Because remember, we said that there isn't anything explicit in the Quran and the Hadith. So you won't find any compelling, profound, clear evidence for any of the views, because the Ahadith are not going to mention anything very clear about these new issues, because they never applied, they never existed during that time. So what we have to do is try to indirectly reach, use a verse or a hadith to reach Allah, to reach a certain conclusion. And we have to try to derive the laws from these hadith. As they say, we have to read between the lines in order to try to find a clue, a hint on one of these certain opinions. So the first mas'ala, the first issue that I will, inshallah, begin speaking about in our second session of this class is the moon sighting mas'ala. And how is it exactly that we determine the new lunar month? Before, during the times of the Imams, up until maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, people usually in a certain village, they would wait until the last night, which is the night of doubt, Laylatul Shak or Yawmul Shak. Let's say it's the 29th of Sha'ban. So either tomorrow will be the first of Ramadan or the day after that, because the Islamic lunar month can only be 29 or 30 days. It can't be 28 and it can't be 31. So either tomorrow is Ramadan or the day after tomorrow. So usually what they would do, the villagers would go out. If someone spots the moon, tomorrow is Ramadan. If no one spots the moon, automatically it will be the day after that. That's it. So what happened eventually during this past century, because of the globalization, the telecommunications, is now we are receiving reports from all over the world. Okay, in my city, the moon was not spotted. In a very close city, it was not spotted. But what about a different country? What about a different continent? Let's say I'm in New York. It was not spotted in New York, but it was spotted in Australia. It was spotted in Africa. It was spotted in the Middle East, or it was spotted in China. So can I rely on that area in order to consider tomorrow as the new month, or no? It has to be cited locally. So this is the first issue that pertaining the moon sighting phenomenon that is fairly new, and that is relying on other places because Muslims have spread to other places, and because we have these easy ways of communication, we could easily ask, and the reports will be given to us if the moon was spotted or not. The second thing that happened with all of this globalization and this advancements is the technological advances. And there's 2 points that we have to address when it comes to the moon sighting because of the scientific advancements. Number one, if an astronomer is able to predict that the moon will be visible, on this certain night, can I rely on the astronomer, or I have to wait and physically see the moon? So this is the first issue that we have to discuss. And number two, can we rely on telescopes or not? Because the telescope obviously is much sharper, is able to see much more than the naked eye. So maybe I'm not able to see the moon, I'm not able to spot it with the naked eye, but I am able to spot it with the telescope. Can I rely on the telescope or not? So first I'll begin with the first part of our issue, of our discussion, and that is, which areas are we allowed Islamically to rely on? Only the close areas, further areas? What's the exact criteria for which areas we can rely on? So I will inshallah begin speaking about this. When it comes to this issue, brothers and sisters, which areas can we rely on? There are mainly 3 views between the ulama. There may be more views, but I'll go over the main views that the ulama have discussed. The first view that is popular between the ulama is the view which they call mabna ta'addud al-afaq, the opinion of ta'addud al-afaq, or in English, the opinion of multiple horizons, meaning different horizons have different laws. So basically what this view says, the ulama that believe in this view, they say if the moon was spotted in a local area, you can rely on it. But if it was a distant area, you're not allowed Islamically to rely on it. Now what's the range? What's the exact criteria or definition for local and distant areas? So how do we define that? Now different ulama will have a different criteria, and even some ulama themselves, they will tell you there isn't a definite answer. For example, amongst the proponents of this view is a Sayyid al-Sistani, hafidhahullah, and if you were to ask him, he tells you, I can't give you a clear-cut answer on which areas you can rely on and which areas you're not allowed to rely on. He will tell you it depends. It depends on many things, many factors. Which season is it? Where on earth are you spotting the moon? There's many astronomical factors, he says, that you have to determine first in order to see which areas you're allowed to rely on and which you're not allowed to rely on. But as a general rule, Sayyid al-Sistani says, the radius is approximately, can differ from time to time, place to place, it's approximately 140 miles. So if you draw a circle, 140 miles on a map, all those areas, they share the same law in their horizons. If the moon was spotted anywhere in that circle, that entire area, they can rely on it. If it's further, it's difficult. Now this is the general point, law that he gives. It may differ from time to time. Sometimes it will be more. It may reach 200 miles. It may reach 300-400 miles. Sometimes it will be much less. So it all depends on many astronomical details. But the point is that you have to spot it locally. The entire earth cannot, have one same law, that they all begin the new month on the same day. So now that we understand this law, this first main view, I'll mention some arguments. I don't want to get too much into details, but I'll mention some brief arguments that these ulama have given. So these ulama, they have given many arguments. I'll mention two. Argument number one, and this is kind of a scientific argument, and I believe a lot of you can relate to this, because this doesn't have to do with religion anymore too much. With fiqh, it has to do with understanding science. So the ulama, they said of this view, they said that what we are doing basically, they compared the new month with the new day. They compared the moon to the sun. So they asked this question: when does the new day begin Islamically? The new day, there is disagreement between the scholars, but it's one of two views. It either begins with dawn, fajr, when we have to pray Salatul Subuh, or it begins with sunrise. Now let's choose, just to make this clear, let's choose the second opinion, that the new Islamic day begins with sunrise. Now they ask you, which sunrise? Now you pray with fajr and salah becomes qada, with, you can no longer pray anymore. The time of Salatul Subuh ends with sunrise. Which sunrise? They tell you, obviously, your local sunrise. If I live in New York and I want to pray in Maghrib, you have to pray it after sunset. Can I rely on Los Angeles's Maghrib? Of course not. Can I rely on the sunset of London? No. You have to rely on your local sunset. Each area has its own sunset, and each area has its own sunrise. Now, no one disagrees on this. They say, this is part one of their argument. Part two is, apply the same thing to the moon. The sun and the moon, same thing. They're two, objects in our solar system. So the salah, the day, let's say the new day, when it begins, when it ends, it's completely tied to the sun. The new month is tied to the moon. The moon is what decides when the new month begins. So they say, based on this reasoning, based on this argument, in the same way that the new day is based on your local sunrise and sunset, the new month is based on spotting the moon in your area. If it's spotted in Australia, that has nothing to do with me. Just like the sunrise and sunset of Australia has nothing to do with me. It's meaningless for us people living in the eastern part of the US. So they compared the sun to the moon, and they said, thus you can't have one unified law for the entire world, that the month begins on this day. Doesn't make sense. It's just like saying the entire world's day begins at one point. The entire world's night begins at one point. No, this is going to differ based on the location. So this is the argument of the ulama. The first argument of many scholars, they've used this to prove this first view. Mabna ta'addud al-afaq. Now if this is clear, if there's no questions, I'll go ahead inshallah to argument number two. The first argument we said was kind of a scientific argument. And this argument is no, it's based on the traditions of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. The second argument goes like this. They say that when we read the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt and we go back to the time of the Imams, what we notice is that the Imams never asked about other areas. For example, it's the night of Eid, night of doubt. Either tomorrow is going to be Ramadan or the day after. Tomorrow is going to be Eid al-Fitr, or the day after. How come the Imams never asked their companions, what about other areas? What happened to the other areas? Is the moon going to be spotted there? Was it spotted there? They didn't even care about the other areas. They just cared about their local city. Now, you may say, well, obviously because there was no forms of communication. If the Imam is sitting in, let's say, Kufa, how would he know if a city that's 30, 40, 50 miles away, if it was spotted or not? Now, yes, now that's true. There wasn't any fast ways of communication, but couldn't the Imam wait until the next day? The Imam would tell his companions, yeah, nobody spotted the moon in Al-Kufa today, but so tomorrow obviously should be Ramadan. It's not going to be Eid, so let's fast. But next day, noontime, afternoon time, someone obviously would bring news from. He would send someone at Maghrib to go and spot it, and it would take 5, 6, 10, 15 hours. So by next day, the Imam would, wait, he'd hold the majlis, he'd ask, what happened? Should we continue fasting? Should we consider it? No! The Imams did not care about other areas. Even other areas, close areas where they could rely on. 50, 70, 80 miles, because remember we said it differs. The 140 mile radius doesn't always apply. And even more than 140 miles, let's say far places where it takes 2-3 days. How come the Imams, 2, 4, 5, 6 days after Eid, they never asked, what happened? Did we fast on the correct day? Did we have Eid on the wrong day? They never went to investigate. It was possible. It would take a couple of days for reports to reach from other places. The Imams never asked. Because if you can rely on other areas, and let's say 200 miles away the moon was spotted, that means tomorrow was Eid while the Imam fasted. So 2-4 days after that, the Imam should have investigated. Or maybe the Imam considered it Eid and it wasn't Eid. So the point that they make is that the Imams only were worried about their area. We don't have a hadith where the Imam used to ask, distant areas, what will they do? What are they going to do? Let's send some people to, to bring us news the following day. No. And in fact, the ulama, they add, another part to this argument, which makes it even more, reasonable or acceptable, is that the ulama, they say if it is allowed to rely on other areas, then this would tell you that in most years of the Imam's lives, they performed their a'mal incorrectly. You see, it's a very clear-cut argument. Number one, if you can rely on other areas, then that means most or some of the a'mal of the Imams were incorrect. So based on this, they say that we understand the Imams didn't worry about other areas because it was not important. Because you could not rely on other areas. Let me give you an example. We perform Hajj. The official Hajj begins on the 9th of the Al-Hujjah. Now, how do you know when the 9th of the Al-Hujjah is? You have to first determine when the Al-Hujjah began. So let's say the Imam is performing Hajj. In Mecca, no one spots the moon. So they say, tomorrow is not the 1st of the Al-Hujjah, it's the day after. But maybe in Medina it was spotted. So if you can rely on Medina, that means Mecca and Medina are the same. So that means tomorrow is the first day of the Al-Hujjah. The Imam never investigated. He has 8 days to ask before Hajj begins. Why not send someone to Medina? Did anyone see it there or not? The Imams didn't care. The Imams, they didn't see the moon in Mecca. The 9th day of the Al-Hujjah came. And they said, let's go to Arafah and perform Hajj. While if they could rely on other areas, that means maybe they performed Hajj on 10th of the Hujjah because the moon was spotted in other areas, but they did not see it. So this is the reasoning that many ulama have given. And there is a hadith that they mentioned to prove this point. The hadith is narrated by Muhammad ibn Isa, and it's an authentic hadith. Muhammad ibn Isa, he says that Abu Amr, one of the companions, he sent a letter to the Imam. He asked him this: أخبرني يا مولاي أنه ربما أشكل علينا هلال شهر رمضان فلا نراه ونرى السماء ليست فيها علة فيفطر الناس ونفطر معهم. He says that sometimes when it's the end of Sha'ban, it's the 29th of Sha'ban, we don't know tomorrow is the first day of Ramadan or no, tomorrow is the last day of Sha'ban. And we look at the sky, 29th at night, we see there's no clouds, and we see that there's no sign of the moon. فلا نراه ونرى السماء ليست فيها علة فيفطر الناس ونفطر معهم. So he says we don't fast because it's still Sha'ban. We don't consider tomorrow as Ramadan because we go to sight the moon, to see the moon, no one sees it. And then this is what the ulama, they say, this is what proves their point. And then he says, وَيَقُولُ قَوْمٌ مِنَ الْحُسَّابِ قبلنا أنه يرى في تلك الليلة بعينها بمصر وأفريقيا والأندلس فهل يجوز يا مولاي ما قال الحساب في هذا الباب حتى يختلف الفرض على أهل الأمصار فيكون صومهم خلاف صومنا وفطرهم خلاف فطرنا So the second part is this: we did not see it in our area, but however, there are astronomers that are telling us, look, here in your city, let's say Medina, it cannot be spotted, but in other areas it could be spotted. Where? He gives the examples of Africa, Al-Andalus, present day Spain, far places, Egypt. It can be spotted there. So he asked the Imams, what do? We did not see it here. So tomorrow technically it's not Ramadan because no one saw the moon of Ramadan. But the astronomers are telling us in those distant places, very far places, the moon will be sighted. What do? Can we rely on those areas or no? Every area has their own obligation. We shouldn't worry about other areas. If they start Ramadan before us. We didn't see it, we start the day after. So he says, the Imam wrote after that, لا تصومن الشك أفطر لرؤيته وصم لرؤيته. The Imam told them this: do not fast if you have doubt, if you have not seen the moon. أفطر لرؤيته وصم لرؤيته. If you see the moon, then tomorrow is Ramadan. If you see the moon, then tomorrow is the day of Eid. But if you do not see the moon, there's no ru'ya, you do not spot it, don't worry about what other people say. So basically the Imam is saying, don't worry about Africa, about Spain, about Egypt. As long as it was not seen in your area, that's enough. That's all you have to worry about. Now, some ulama, they have objected to this argument. They have said, wait a minute. The Imam is not saying you can't rely on other areas. The Imam, you have to be precise. The Imam is saying you cannot rely on astronomers. The astronomers are saying this. Maybe this is what the Imam is implying. These astronomers give you, they don't give you certainty. At the end of the day, you're still going to be in doubt. How do these astronomers know this? Are their predictions accurate? So the only reason the Imam says, leave all this doubt and make sure you see it is because we cannot rely on astronomers. It's not because you can't rely on other places. Now, fine, they say this is a good objection, but however, couldn't the Imam tell him that, what? If the astronomers do tell you this, then investigate. After Ramadan, send people to Africa, send people to those places, bring reports. I'm sure people will come and they will tell you. And then you can decide if you have to make up a day, or maybe you'll understand that the day you fasted or you didn't is right. So the Imam just tells him, if you saw it, fast. If you didn't, don't. The Imam didn't tell him that you have to investigate, because maybe if I investigate and I see people in Africa saw the moon of Ramadan, that means that day wasn't the last day of Sha'ban just because I didn't see it. It was the first day of Ramadan. So the Imam should tell you, investigate a week, 10 days after. Maybe you'll figure out that in Africa, in Spain, in far places, they saw the moon of Ramadan, and thus that day which you didn't fast, it's okay, you did no haram. But now you have to make it up. Why didn't the Imam say that? This is their answer to this objection. The Imam, basically, he answered with a tone, don't worry, don't care about this matter. So this is the second argument that the ulama of this view mention. And with these two arguments, they prove that you cannot rely on far distant areas. Because of the scientific reason, they compared the moon to the sun. And because of the ahadith of the Imams. First of all, the Imams didn't care about other areas. They went to Hajj on the 9th based on their city of the Al-Hujjah. And likewise, when the narrator asked the Imams about moonsighting in other areas, he says, worry about your area. Even though he could have told him, don't rely on the astronomers, you yourself, your friends, investigate. And then maybe you'll have to make that day up because it was the first day of Ramadan, but you didn't know. So based on these two arguments, they say that you cannot rely on all other areas. It has to be spotted locally. So this is the first main view, and we called it Mabna Ta'addud al-Afaq. And we said amongst the major main proponents of this view today is the Sayyid al-Sistani, hafadhahullah. So that is the first view, Ta'addud al-Afaq. Now obviously there's many ulama throughout history who have chosen this view, and I think it was the main view for centuries, simply because this issue wasn't even properly discussed between the ulama, because they did not have the forms of communication. They didn't worry about other countries, because they were disconnected from those other places. Each place worried about their own area. So in the past maybe few decades, this became this topic, this discussion became more prevalent, and the ulama began to discuss it in more depth. This is the first view, مبنى تعدد الآفاق, the view of multiple horizons. The second view is the view of وحدة الآفاق. It's the opposite almost of the first view. Basically the view of the unity of horizons. So all the horizons, they share the same law. All the horizons will begin on the same day. And basically, now this view comes in multiple forms, but I'll speak about the most basic form of this opinion or view, is that if the moon is spotted anywhere in the world, this is sufficient for the entire world. So basically all the horizons of the world, they share the same law. They begin and end their months together. What's the arguments of this proof? Likewise, many, but likewise scientific proof and a piece of evidence or argument from the ahadith, from the traditions. The first proof, the scientific proof, is an astronomical proof, we can call it. And basically what these ulama say is that how many times, they tell the ulama of the first view, they say you compared the moon to the sun. They say that's wrong. You cannot compare the moon to the sun. Why? Because how many times is the moon born? When we say new moon, that's like the moon is born. It goes into a state of mahaq that the ulama call it, which you can't see it, and then it's born once again. You could see the crescent once again. How many times is the moon born? There's only one new moon, isn't there? Even as an astronomer, there is only one new moon. While with sunset and sunrise, you have multiple sunsets and multiple sunrises. Even astronomers, they accept this. Every area has their own sunset. The sun rises and the sun sets. That's based on location. But the moon being born, the new moon, is not based on location. We only have one new moon, and that is not based on your area. It's for the entire world. And the new moon itself does not signalize the new month, the ulama say. Some people say, the new moon, you could find that astronomically. When the new moon happens, the new month begins. That does not signalize the new month. You have to wait after that, some hours after that. Because as we mentioned, the moon enters a state of mahaq, meaning you can't see it anymore because there's no light being reflected from the sun back at you. So it's pitch black. You can't see it. Until it starts orbiting. Once it starts orbiting once again, it goes away from the sun, you begin to see the light of the moon once again, the crescent. That very first second, when you begin, the people of the earth, begin seeing the light of the moon, this is when the new month officially begins. So once again, the ulama of Wahdatul Afaq, the second view, they say how many times does after the moon entering the state of pitch darkness, mahaq, how many times does it leave that state? It only leaves it once. It can't leave more than twice, because the first second that it leaves, khalas, it left. It can't happen twice. It's like you're leaving your house. You only leave your house once. After that, you've left. Nothing else is happening. So they say because the moon only leaves that state of mahaq, which is pitch darkness, and then a crescent forms, it only happens once. That means there could only be 1 second, 1 instance where the new month begins. And it has to be universal, it has to be for the entire world, because it only happens once for the entire world, where the entire world could not see the moon, and then all of a sudden they saw the moon. This only happens once. That very first second, when they see the moon, this is when the new month begins. But with sunrise, with the sun, it's based on location. So you can't compare a phenomenon, which is the sun, that is based on location, to the moon, which is not based on location. Astronomers, they say there's only one new moon, and it leaves the mahaq, the moon leaves the mahaq, and it turns into a crescent only once. That very first instant where it leaves, it only happens once, but for the sun, it happens multiple times. This is their justification. We may agree with this, we may not agree with that. We understand this. We go to the traditions of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And I'll mention one hadith that the proponents of this view, Mabna Wahdat al-Afaq, mention. They rely on a bunch of ahadith of Ahlul Bayt to prove this. And I'll mention one hadith, Sahihat Abd al-Rahman ibn Abi Abdullah. It's Sahih. The hadith is authentic. This man, Abd al-Rahman ibn Abi Abdullah, he says, I asked Imam al-Sadiq one day, سألته عن هلال رمضان يغم علينا في 29 من شعبان. Once again, just like the other hadith I mentioned, it's the 29th of Sha'ban. Tomorrow's Ramadan 1, or is it 30th of Sha'ban? We don't know. And he says there's clouds in the air, in the sky. We can't see. Maybe the moon is there, maybe it's not. So what do? He says, فَقَالَ لَا تَصُمْ إِلَّا أَن تَرَاهُ. Unless you see the moon, do not fast tomorrow with the intention of Ramadan. Yes, tomorrow you can fast with the intention of mustahab, ma fi dhimma, you want to redo an older fast, you can do that. But if you do not see the moon of Ramadan, you can't fast with the intention of Ramadan. You have to see it, then fast. And then the Imam said these words, and this is what they used to prove their point. He says, فَإِن شَهِدَ أَهْلُ بَلَدٍ آخَرْ فَقْضِهِ. The Imam said, if after Ramadan, people from another city, this is what the Imam says, another city, they come and they testify that we saw the moon of Ramadan on that night, that you guys never saw it, then you have to make that day up. Remember, we said the proponents of the first view, they said the Imams never addressed this point. They say, what do you mean he never addressed it? This is Sahihat Abd al-Rahman. He asking Imam al-Sadiq, what do? I didn't see the moon of Ramadan. He says, if you didn't see it, don't fast. But then after that, if people came from a distant place and they told you that we saw the moon of Ramadan, we saw it that night which you never saw it, that means the next day was Ramadan and you never fasted. Now you have to make it up. It's very simple. Now, how do they... what do they use exactly to prove that you can rely on other areas? They say the Imam said he said it in a general way. He said, أهل بلد آخر. He said if it's from another place, another city. The Imam didn't give a radius, if it's a city in your country, 200 miles. He said another city. It could be China, it could be India, it could be Africa, it could be even New Zealand and Australia. If there was a limit, a condition, a radius, he should have said it. The Imam said it so generally. If people from another place, they come and see the hilal, they see the hilal and they come and testify, khalas, you have to make it up. Another place, another city. So the Imam did not confine it to a close city, 140, for example, mile radius. No, he said a city. A city means any city in the world. The Imam could have said it's a close nearby city, but he didn't. So based on this hadith, they say you can rely on the entire world.